something that was a competitive advantage for your business just went away overnight. At the same time, something your customers have always wanted is now possible. And so your job as a leader is to figure out both before your competitors do.
Hello and welcome back to the Retail Podcast. Today's guest is a bit of a grab, if you like, a little bit of a snatch, because I was lucky to see Jason or what MACH Alliance were doing at Shop Talk Spring, but we didn't actually get to talk. And obviously, I'll ask Jason to introduce himself in a minute. But Jason, you're the CEO of Orium and chair of MACH Alliance, right?
That's right. Yeah, and the elected president actually started the MACH Alliance. That's correct.
Okay, acting president. Okay. And basically, if you don't know what the MACH Alliance is, it's an organization that's helped define the shift away from monolithic platforms, which is quite interesting because you have some platform providers as members as well. But then now the conversation has moved on again, if you like, which is why we all love tech, towards AI-driven agentic ecosystems where decisions aren't necessarily just supported by technology, but actually made by the enterprises. So I think, Jason, that's like the high-level positioning. But I'd love to, before we get started, find out a little bit more about you and a little bit more about the MACH Alliance. I'm sure, there's so much more. Welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and the Alliance before we get into the question?
Hi there. Yes, Alex, great to be here. And so I'm Jason Cottrell, founder and CEO of Orium. Orium being kind of the largest kind of specialty provider for focus on composable commerce, customer data, and digital experience. And so we're generally working with some of the kind of fastest growing ISVs and infrastructure providers for companies doing hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in GMV. And that tends to be kind of mid to large enterprise, right? So, really helping to make sure that we can use composability, multiple systems to serve kind of the unique needs of these businesses across all their channels and the ways they go to market. And then as part of that, we've been involved for years now in the MACH Alliance. I was elected as the president of that organization last year. And that organization is very much focused on how, companies kind of own their architecture and how the concepts of modern agentic commerce and agentic operations are going to manifest. We like to say this concept of composable, you use multiple systems to run your business. And how can you do that well? How can you said that the monolith, how can you move from, break kind of free of the monolith? And the reality is for most modern enterprises now, they're running, tens of systems to meet the needs of their business. They're not doing everything in one place. The same is going to be true for the agentic era. You're not going to have one agent running in your business. You're going to have not even tens, but hundreds or thousands. And that's going to be the reality, and that's going to be okay. And what we're focused on with the MACH Alliance is kind of the how standards and how vendors can work together to make that successful for everybody.
If you could sort of help us all for a little, if we could take a look at the engineered processes around agentic and what those key core processes look like or what they should be, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So I mean, if you think about where most organizations are today, maybe they have their team, they've given everybody Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT, and in essence, people are using that, as a better search and maybe as a bit of an accelerator. So most organizations are still very early days. If you look at where it's going, and if you look at where AI native what AI native startups do, they're building agents that are persistent and kind of scoped and secure that run all the time. And that's as organizations get more and more mature, these engineered processes that are kind of persistent and always running and kind of defined to do a specific thing become very important. And I think what's critical there is then, what you spend your time on as a business is kind of setting them up, getting them so they're executing successfully, but people are working on these systems instead of using them as essentially kind of a better task accelerator. So they're running, even if no one's coming to the office that day, these systems are running kind of as you've scoped them. So we're seeing this emerge in concepts like go-to-market and GTM engineering or marketing engineering. Profound launched a course last week on the concept of marketing engineering. But I think, consistently we're seeing this amongst our customer bases, like how, where, as you get more mature, where do you start to use these kind of standing engineered agentic processes to take on more substantial workload in the business? And then that presents the next question, which is how do you train your team to design and build these? and how do you rethink your architecture to support that?
When you look at infrastructure and specifically agentic infrastructure, how do you think businesses have to rethink their architectures?
So I think there's a few ways. So when we look at this lens of composability, one of the first things is this is early days. It's Game of Thrones right now. So you don't know which models are going to work best. You don't, last year or this time a year ago, Claude was one of multiple options. This year, they're the clear front runner, say, for kind of business and coding. Next year, it may be different again, right? Often we're 1 year model release or feature release away from a shift in sentiment. You look at, say, Cursor a year ago and Cursor today, yet some of the, yet the announcement, a year from now, they may be kind of back at the top. So think Game of Thrones, which means you've got to be careful on building everything too tightly coupled around one AI provider. And also recognizing that many of the software vendors you have today are going to bring their own capability under the hood, right? They're building and deploying and appointing agents on your behalf that are, if you look at the stats from recent studies from Google and McKinsey and also the MACH Alliance as well, we do an annual research report thinking about not one big agent that you just deploy at your business, but thinking about these kind of defined task specific agents that you scope for appropriate security and data access, that you scope for where people need to be involved in the process, and then you put those to work. That's where agentic AI is being most successful and can be done safely. So these kind of composing all these agents becomes very, very critical. I think that what it also does is it means that you can more rapidly change model providers. You can more rapidly change systems. When you're thinking about that interchangeability, that's setting you up on a 5-year basis for success. We talk to too many companies right now where they've put $30 million into this broad scope AI agent that they essentially have to put in the garbage now. It's too tightly coupled to the model, and the AI labs or a vendor have come along and replaced it overnight. And so you really got to think very critically about where you put your investment, but also keeping that flexibility to shift models, to take bits out of what you're doing in one system and put it in another. And that's where as a MACH Alliance, we think about we're encouraging that concept of composability because it gives that adaptability going forward. The last thing that we are really trying to encourage, I think it's probably one of the biggest things that's being underestimated in the architecture for all of this. There's new architecture layers that need to come out to allow hundreds or thousands of agents. And when everybody in your company can increasingly be not say a coder, but a builder, right? And as you get more advanced in these engineered flows, the way I like to look at it is you don't want policies enforced in the agents themselves. So you need to rethink other parts of infrastructure as the safe and secure way that agents and people can access and take action. You don't, if you think of how you'd hire an employee, right? You wouldn't, great, Alex, day one, here's your handbook, your training. Now I'm going to give you super user access to all of our systems. Please don't break anything, right? It's not what you do. You scope the access of employees to what they can safely do and what they need to do their job. And then you also you train them and supervise them, and they only get more access as they've proven capability. If anything, just to protect the employee too, right? Like they don't want to make errors. So when we see people developing agents often right now, they're thinking about, well, I'll program in the agent. Please don't delete all my orders. Please don't email all of my customers. And we think that yes, you can do that, but it needs to be enforced separately in policy too. So we're really discussing, this concept of systems of action. So, where do agents route into change orders, to issue refunds, to message customers? Those systems need to have policy enforcement too, as they do for human users. And so thinking about the critical intersection points, and are those vendors upgrading in that regard, or is there an intermediary layer that you put in place in between to do that policy enforcement? Then the last part is governance. So then, there's vendors coming on the market like a Galileo, which was recently bought by Cisco. But there's others that are essentially doing kind of company-wide inline enforcement of policies, but also monitoring and aggregating, so you can see how all the agents in your business are running. Are they running effectively, and are they running in a compliant way? So these are systems that didn't exist 2 years ago, but to run agents at scale, you'll need them in your business.
There's so many, God, I wish this conversation was for an hour, because there's so many different points I want to talk about. For example, QA and how the human in the loop is still part of, even if you have loads of agents doing it, you always will need ChatGPT to also, or whoever else, the either or, to be that guardrail, to be the QA, to be the human in the loop.
QA is definitely a fascinating one, and I think both QA and also development operations infrastructure, right? Like you're shipping more code,
Yeah.
and over time as agents doing more and more of that, I like to think of development operations even going back 15 years ago, and I remember at the time people saying, but are we just going to automate all the developers? And then let's look forward to today, we still don't have enough developers, right? Because we write so much more code, and so and what we do write is often more sophisticated, and I think the same thing's going to happen again. We use some great agentic coding, or sorry, QA infrastructure. It makes our QAs dramatically more efficient, and for better or for worse, there's never enough time for QA, right? There's no company in the world that has as many QAs as it should to be able to check absolutely everything. So you get first you get a wider scope. You can test more robustly every time. And so that fills some of the efficiency gain, but you almost need to actually start having agentic do the first line QA on agentic coding just to keep pace. But also we find there's a quality improvement. It's not just speed. Even in the last year, the quality of these tools has improved. They do better review. And then you also need to think about where people are in the loop and how do you upgrade also your deployment infrastructure and DevOps so that it can keep pace with all this code movement. So it kind of triggers these upgrades, but across the board, I think as you rethink that system, you start to get some of those efficiency gains. You can start to get much more personalized experiences. You can start to ship far more features for customers. You can start to kind of compete in new segments and with new abilities. And that's where you want to push to as an organization.
This sort of lends itself really nicely into the next point about co-work, which is the book that you recommended that I read, and you have it right there. Oh no,
I do actually. Yeah, I keep it on my desk because it's one of my favorite books right now. Ethan
So
Mollick.
intelligent. I mean, it's a cracking book, and I wish I read it 2 years ago, because that is about hybrid work and how humans and agents basically produce better results together. How do you translate that? What does that mean to you and the MACH Alliance, if you like?
Yeah, I think that one of the questions that I often get is, how do I deploy agentic in my business safely? And I think the answer is with human in the loop, right?
Yeah.
So don't just jump to agents running.
Yeah.
You even if you're doing these engineered processes, it's not. You think about where a human is checking, and then you build agents that do some of those checks, and the humans check them. But you still keep an individual in the loop, and I think that allows you to get to not only the right end outcome, but it allows a level of kind of safety and governance in the mix too. And what I think is exciting is, right now we're also in a window where, it's making some things much more efficient, or kind of actually finally giving us the time to do things the way we were always supposed to do them. We just never had time or budget to do it. But then, it's giving people new capabilities, new abilities. And I think we spend a lot of time right now maybe focused on the first efficiency bit. My favorite quote from Ethan Mollick is, something that was a competitive advantage for your business just went away overnight, right? There's new competitors who can now replicate that, and they're coming at you.
Yeah.
At the same time, something your customers have always wanted is now possible.
Yeah.
And so your job as a leader is to figure out both before your competitors do. So I think the interesting thing about co-work is thinking about where can you deploy the specialty knowledge of your team or your data assets or your market position for new advantage that AI is now made commercially feasible. And so I think that's exciting both at an individual level, new things that we could always, if we look at what do our teams love doing, right? They didn't come to work to do manual tests if you're a QA. They didn't come to work to kind of shift a wireframe if you're a designer.
Yeah.
Designers love building products. Product designers love building products that people love.
Yeah.
They can adapt their tooling to do that. They've got new ways to do that were never possible for QAs. Kind of love quality and finding errors and shipping a higher quality system, but how they do it can shift. I think our VP technology developers love puzzles, right? The puzzles are changing, but the puzzles are still there. There's new puzzles. So I think as we rethink how people do their work, new abilities they've just been granted in other domains, and then as a company, extract that out to a company level and strategic advantage, I think it becomes a very exciting time. And I'm hoping as we all kind of get our head around these systems on the efficiency side, that really trying to encourage as an alliance, starting to think about these new ways of working, these new advantages as a big place that leaders can put time in 2026 and 27 for the sake of their business, but also it's part of kind of bringing the team on the journey with you. People need to see what they're going towards. Look, we don't have many telephone switchboard operators anymore, but we have network engineers and always on global communications. And I think it's worked out okay. And I think that's what part of it we can paint as a leader in 2026.
What do you think? A final question. As leaders who are basically being exposed to so many new agentic possibilities, how do you think, or have you seen examples of the best ways of how leaders are sharing that with their team?
So there's certainly an element of kind of demonstrating by example, right?
Yeah.
And some of that's a topic because we're busy day to day, but it is finding kind of days to carve out to actually, you don't have to be like, I don't necessarily have to be like programming things to production, but showing, especially like rethinking that you're thinking about your market position, whatever your strength is, that you're thinking about your market position, that you're, hey, I went on Friday and I rebuilt this process. So an agent is doing it, even if it's an agent in Claude, but we're running this first, and I built a heuristic the agent runs on, and I'm tuning that, and I'm just showing people an agent first process. So I think building our own capabilities, demonstrating that in practice to the team, and then I think providing them space, but also being, one of the things we like to look at, there's a 4-stage maturity from Zapier, a maturity model that we really like on kind of how people build skills towards kind of more advanced agentic use. And one of the things that we try to normalize is nobody skips to the most advanced state. Everybody goes through each step. So if you're halfway through, that's okay. Everybody's there at some point.
Yeah.
So let's have the conversation around like how do people move along faster. But I think normalizing that this is a journey for nearly everybody right now. And so the focus is just how actively are you advancing, not where you are. I think that's one of the other key things that we can set. So otherwise it becomes this scary, intimidating thing, as opposed to just like kind of being where you are and let's try to support and encourage you through each step as quick as you can.
Now, again, Jason, I've loved this conversation. It's gone past so quickly, and it feels like I have to invite you back at least, monthly to have a conversation about AI and agentic. If because I just think it's such a topical. For example, there are thousands of merchandisers around the world being told by their business to go build some sort of merchandising dashboard with some sort of agentic capability, and then you've got a whole bunch of startups who are saying, "Hey, you don't need to do that. Let us build it for you." And that whole process of building it step by step and then getting it to be business, as you were saying, being able to have the guardrails that it's a business app that the business can use. I think that's in my mind, those merchandisers are the people sort of screaming for help right now in terms of how do they navigate this new world. And I think some of the stuff you provided today hopefully takes a step in that direction.
So, it's a great topic. It's a timely topic and one that's evolving so quickly. So really glad that you're taking the time to cover it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Alex.